Hello, everybody, and welcome to Ice Time. We dive into some of the big ideas around the NHL. I'm Mike Fink, and I'm joined by Justin Giampietro, who covers the Philadelphia Flyers prospects, all things prospects, actually, a lot of that, and covers the NHL at large for the hockey writers. And I mentioned this last week with Alex Jovanci on that podcast guests are like shoot picking who to go in the shootout. Like, the coaches don't know who to choose sometimes because it's like they don't know. They don't watch shootout often. If that's the case, Justin Giampietro is like the Pavel Datsuk or Trevor Zegras of shootout contestants. Where I'm like, all right, yeah, you got. I know what I'm getting out of Justin. Justin, how are you doing? I feel like this is a lot of praise early, but what's going on?
I am flattered, but I regret to inform you that Zegras hasn't scored in the shootout in his last few attempts from what I can remember off my brain. For the longest time, he was like the best shootout shooter ever, and then he's cooled off a bit. So I hope I'm previous Zegras than not the Zegras now.
No, he's gone cold lately. I should have double checked that, but I know like back in the day it was like Pavel Datsuk, where when the shootout came around, usually coaches don't know what's going on in the shoot. Don't know what's going on. They don't know who to choose. Like it's the truth. You ask them, they'll say like we have our suspects, but we don't know for sure if they're good in the shootout. It's very random. In the back in the day, the Red Wings, it was like there's a shootout that Sook was on the ice ready to go. He's like, all right, I'm going first. It's basically like everyone knew that, but enough of shootout talk and just fun in behind the scenes sort of stuff. I brought you on because the World Juniors is coming up. The NHL break is around the corner, and with that, the World Juniors comes in. So for people with their hockey fix, and it's kind of it's fun, especially for prospect people. And as an aside, for young writers trying to get their foot in the door. I don't know if it still applies, but it used to be the World Juniors was one of those things that like anyone who applied can go to. It was like that in the draft, on the draft combine, were like the things that if like you really wanted to get your foot in the door, like you could they were very like not lenient, but it's like very easy to get access to, or much easier than NHL games and NHL teams. And it's a good place to really get started. A lot of great hockey writers get their foot in the door at the World Juniors and get to know a lot of the people around the NHL there. But I digress on that as well. Let's just kind of do a jump the pucks, talk about the World Juniors at large. And I'll start with a broad question, which is for people who don't follow the prospects, people who are just going to tune into the World Juniors, like it's going to be on NHL Network or TSN or wherever it is. They're going to see the Twitter highlights of the goals. What should they be watching for? Because I feel like people who turn on NHL Network, they watch it one game and they see it's like 10-0. Canada's beating down Austria, and they're like, all right, this is boring hockey. I'm not watching the rest of this. So what's your guide to watching the World Juniors? Start with that.
For me personally, and this is kind of an at-large thing with prospects, I like to find a player I like and just kind of focus on them. It makes it, I think it makes it more entertaining. Um, not every team at the World Juniors is going to have somebody. There are a few teams who don't, I believe. I can't name them off the top of my head, but there are some. But if your team has a player in the World Juniors, watch that player. It's very entertaining. You may even be able to track things like shots and things like zone entries. Like that's something that anybody can track, and it's to me it's fun to do that, and it gives you kind of a gauge of where that player's at in their development. Or you can just watch the teams play. I do enjoy prospects. What specifically when it comes to hockey, there are sports out there where you watch the younger guys compete and it's just not the same as the professional level. But with hockey, honestly, it's up there. Like these games are competitive. Even you look at Canada and Latvia last year, how that was a much tighter game than people expected. Obviously, the shots were kind of uh, lopsided in Canada's favor, but they did lose that game. Granted, that was one of the bigger upsets in the tournament's history, but you just don't see those 10-0 ish games, I think, as often as you used to. Maybe that's recency bias, but Yeah, these games are fun to watch, and prospects, every player who's there, I think belongs there and is there for a reason, especially when you have these, especially with these powerhouse countries like Canada and the US and Sweden and even Finland.
Yeah, there's the prop. Every team has them, and I think what's interesting. This is why a lot of times the people who scout the game, the World Juniors, why it's again one of those good foot in the door things. Back to that is that there are GMs everywhere. All the GMs go to this, and all like the people you have to really love hockey to be there. But like because it's like a marathon type of event, but a lot of people will go and just watch the player. And on TV, it's hard to kind of focus in on one player just because I mean that's general a hockey problem that like the TV focuses on the puck and the camera focuses on the puck and you're trying to focus on a player. It's kind of hard to see a player on every shift. Sometimes when the game slows down, you can focus on them a bit. But that's why a lot of scouts and a lot of GMs love just going and seeing one player and watching them play. And you can do a bit of that. And I think what's interesting is you can focus even on games that are one-sided, which you'll have a few of them early, more early than late, because once the tournament really comes down to it, it's really a closer tournament and the games are tighter. But early on, you will have those lopsided games. You could focus in on, okay, what's this player on my team doing on my system, and it really helps out a lot. You mentioned Canada. We'll talk a lot about Canada, I'm sure, soon because they're the most star-studded on paper, at least, team in this tournament. The USA side, who who are we watching out for? I know Cole Eiserman's on this team. He's centering, and I don't know if he's centering a line, but he's definitely on. He's a big name on this team, and a few there's a few big names to watch. But who would you say are the prospects to zero in on?
Well, the obvious one is James Hagens.
Oh
He was
right,
at the
centers
tournament.
like
Yeah,
centers. James Hagan, right? Should have known.
yeah, he was at the tournament last year, and he had from what I can remember, a very good tournament. That didn't result in him going high in the draft. I think 7 might have been a little low for him, but regardless, this is kind of his team now. You have those 2023 draft guys, you know, aging out of the tournament, so this is really his team. Obviously, a defenseman like Cole Hudson, who was amazing last year, he's coming back, but really, it is the Hagen show, and if the U.S. is going to three-peat or even come close to doing so, he's going to be kind of the guy who drives it, and it'll be very fun to see how he handles that without those high end line mates, guys like Leonard and Gabe Perreault, like those guys being gone. It'll just be really interesting to see how he can drive a line with maybe not new players because he's played with a lot of these guys before. When you come to a tournament like this, you've probably played with your line mates a few times at previous tournaments, but regardless, this is a little bit of a newer experience when it comes to this level being this much of an outlier, I guess, versus the rest of the team.
And he's one of the players that he's beyond the draft year where he's drafted by the Bruins. He's in their system. He's in college now, and he's working his way towards the NHL. You mentioned Cole Hudson. I was wondering about him too potentially. I mean, see anything like Lane Hudson. What's interesting is yeah, you have a few of those names to keep in mind that now they're older players. And what I'm curious about is the players that haven't been drafted yet, some potential risers on the draft board. And I think because everyone's focused on McKenna, and they should talk about him uh, later, but there are some risers on the draft board I feel like can really make a name for themselves. One name I feel like people are circling now is Chase Reed, who had a great tournament in, I believe it was the series between the CHL prospects and the U.S. development prospects. He had a good tournament there, or certainly had a great few shifts there, which stood out. So I know he's a player that you're probably talking for hours about, but who else are the prospects you'd say can really climb up the draft board with a good tournament?
One of the early guys I've heard a lot about is Carson Carls. He was he was at the Holinka Gretzky Cup. I'm very sure about that. Um, But since then, I feel like he has really risen, and he has excited a lot of public scouts that I've seen out there. The people really like his game, and this was a player who I can't recall all the way back then, but I feel like in the preseason, maybe a mid first round prospect grade. Some people have him top 5 now. They like a defenseman with decent size who really thinks the game well and who just has a lot of two-way upside. Um, Again, there are a lot. This is a very stacked defensive class, I would say, especially with a guy like Chase Reed, who is a riser in his own right. But Carl's is a guy that a lot of people really, really like. And to make Canada, uh, which is very unusual, by the way, for a draft eligible defenseman. I know Keaton Veerhoff did it. I know that Schaefer did it, but that was an outlier. Like people were skeptical of Schaefer making last year's team because it was so unusual for a young defenseman to make it. So for a guy like that to make the team, for Carls to make the team, that's huge. And if he can get minutes, if he can prove his worth, then that'll be really big for him.
And that's the other layer to it. Can they get their minutes? Because this year's draft, it looks like shaping up where there's a lot of defensemen that are climbing up the board, but also for this tournament, how much can we read into if they're only getting a few minutes of ice time? They're not standing out, but they're just going to be, they're going to have a few shifts here or there. Someone like Keaton Verhoff, like how much that's going to be an interesting balance. Like, how do you see that shaping? How do you see this tournament shaping up from the defensive unit? Like from these teams, like is there a defenseman maybe on another country that can get that ice time just because Canada's going to probably have to run 4 or 3 pairs, really 3 pairs. They're going to have to run evenly. Is there a defenseman in another country that can really get his ice time and really have a good tournament and really climb up boards because of that?
Um, there aren't a lot of, at least from what I can recall, a lot of draft eligible guys. Usually, defensemen who are gonna, climb up like the draft board and stuff. It's usually those kind of like lesser known countries where these even 16-year-olds, like draft -2, draft -1, those guys can get more ice time. Um, but these, when you're talking about Canada, especially, again, like I said, it's hard to make the team, and there's a certain level that's required to impress that much.
Yeah, and I was thinking also that some of these defensemen are already drafted. I was thinking like who on a smaller country. There's Adam Juracek, who I believe is David Juracek's brother, but he was already drafted, so he's there to kind of monitor, and also is kind of like Cole Hudson. I wonder if he's anything like his brother. Could be a good defenseman, although Lane Hudson's a great defenseman, hard to live up to that hype. So I digress there. How much pressure is on Gavin McKenna to have a great tournament?
That's interesting because the thing is, he hasn't played hockey in a while. Penn State has been on break for I don't even know how long at this point. I feel like it's been a few weeks, maybe a month at this point. So this is his first real action. These training camp games that he's getting into, and he had a not so great turnover against Sweden pretty recently. But again, I'm not sure how much stock you can put into a tournament like this, especially with, again, he's been away for a while, and just to be on the team at this young of an age is pretty impressive. I expect him to have a good tournament. I mean, he's going to get minutes. This isn't his first rodeo. This is the norm for him. I mean, he has defied his age at every level for years. Um, I mean, I'm looking for him to make plays. Canada, the way that they're usually run is that they kind of want that two-way responsibility out of you, and that's kind of an area in which he struggled a bit um, going back to college this year. So we'll see if he can adapt. We'll see if he can play the way that they want to play. But there are going to be those inevitable comparisons to specifically Ivar Stenberg, who is going to be playing for Sweden. You have two top draft picks who are on pretty good teams. It's going to be something that people are going to look at. They're going to compare your tournaments, but at the end of the day, you do have to look at the broader picture. In my eyes, you have to break down what they are doing, what they aren't doing, versus like point totals and how far they go. So we'll see. We'll see how McKenna plays. That's definitely something, a player I'm going to be watching.
It's interesting because it is interesting his trajectory of it because it was coming into this season. Everyone's like, that teams are going to tank for McKenna. That was the talk. Everyone was like, he's going to be the generational talent. Everyone's going to want to get him. And he struggled at Penn State. It was the bold decision whether he should go there or not, whether he should stay at junior and really stand out at junior hockey. And he decided to go to Penn State. It's not that he struggled as much as he's just not blown people away the way other prospects who are someone like James Higgins, who's now at Boston College, is playing a lot better. Players who are standing out, who are older, and he's a younger player and he's learning the game. And now he's coming to the World Juniors, and I think there is that. I mean, people are dropping him on the draft board. Some people who have notable people who are dropping him to 4 or 5 or something in that range. And there's questions. Okay, maybe he isn't that generational talent, and it is interesting because I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on him now, or there's going to be not pressure on him because I feel like he has a second half at Penn State to turn his season around. But there's going to be this feeling of, okay, we want to see what he does on a star-studded team. What we want to see maybe Penn State. Okay, he's not going to succeed there because Penn State's also not a good team. It's not a good team in the college level, and he's playing well with not much help. Let's see what happens when he does have that help. I mean, it's going. I think that's the interesting story is what kind of tournament he has with all that in mind. Uh, one of the interesting things I just noticed this looking at the rosters. One person to follow just because you know he tweets out a lot is Mark Masters. He tweets out the teams, the lines. He's always tweeting about the World Junior stuff. And one interesting thing is I noticed Jet Luchenko is warming up on the wing there. I can't imagine the Flyers are too happy with that. I wonder what your thoughts are with when you hear that. Just something I noticed. He's on the wing. He's not. I don't think he's a winger based on what I mean. I've seen a few games with him in Lehigh Valley in the playoffs last year, and I don't think the Flyers see him as a winger. So I'm wondering, what just your thoughts on that, or is it just because the Canada roster has too many centers and they move them around a lot? Just your thoughts on that.
One thing that you may notice about big time Canadian prospects is that a lot of them are centers. It's kind of a little rare for them to be wingers. Obviously, it does happen, but just think about it. When you are a very young, like I'm talking 10, 11, 12 years old, and you're in Canada, especially, you're probably going to be your team center. If you're the best player on your team, you're going to be a center. You're not going to play wing. They're going to teach you how to play center. And I feel like that kind of makes them a center at these higher levels when they get to Canadian juniors. And so you have so many guys who are experienced at center that one guy just eventually has to be bounced out. That's kind of how I see it. He is still center. Like, it's just how they're utilizing him. But it wouldn't be the first time that the Flyers were upset with Luchenko's usage at World Juniors. I remember, I believe it was GM Briere. After the tournament, he was a little bit upset that he was in the bottom 6 the whole time and just depth PK, and that was his only role in a team that got bounced early.
No, yeah, it is interesting because I mean it is an interesting thing because yeah, all these prospects that they come up from the junior ranks or wherever they are, oftentimes they're the best player on their team. Yeah, they're just going to be thrown out in all situations, and they're going to play. I mean, they're going to play center naturally. It's interesting. That's what I guess is interesting about McKenna a bit because I think if I'm not mistaken, he's not a center. So it is a little interesting to see that, and and that he's not, and that he is being. I mean, that he's not being developed that way. So it is a little interesting to see that. But yeah, it's these players. It's also a reminder. I think this is what's cool about this tournament is that all these prospects are growing up the number one players on their team. And you really start to see it in this tournament, but also when they get to the AHL, or when they get to the NHL, when they get to the next levels, where it's all right, you're scoring, your talent's not just going to bail you out everywhere. You have to do all the other stuff as well. And I think that's kind of what's interesting is that maybe that's something that y'all, is that something to watch is, and it's hard to really gauge it, but the stuff that aside from the scoring, because everyone in the tournament knows how to score. Everyone's talented. Everyone's got the skill, but just the ability to defend, ability to do everything else. Is that something else I would say to watch out for?
I feel like a lot of these guys um, are able to adjust pretty easily. Um, because you're going to be asked to play quote unquote more of a team game. Again, like especially for these more structured countries when it comes to like if you're in Canada, right? You're not allowed to play the type of game that you're used to playing, I would say a lot of the time. It's going to be very responsible and two-way, even though you're very talented. It's just going to be more structured than it usually is. It makes sense. I mean, when you have a team of so many good players, it's just not the norm. You're used to having, okay, your skilled players are at the top, then your kind of depth-ish grinder, two-way type guys on the second, third, and especially fourth lines. But if it's skill from top to bottom, it's hard to give everybody let everybody do what they're good at doing. So it's always an interesting balance, I think.
It's funny. I think that's the same sort of conversation we were hearing about the Olympic team, which is that as much as we want some skilled players, that the also the same type of GMs are making decisions that will want those fourth liners on their team. Someone might choose, Bill Guerin might choose Brock Nelson over Kyle Connor. That's an aside for later. It's interesting because based on like the lines from Mark Masters, based on like early projections, it looks like one of the interesting lines is it looks like Michael Misa is going to be centering a line with Tej Aginla and Porter Martone. And I look at that and I'm like, that's just going to be a skilled line that's going to overpower a lot of teams. And it's going to overpower teams in a lot of ways. And what's interesting with some of those players, obviously Porter Martone is one of the players in the Flyer system, and Misa's the Sharks top prospect. I wonder, if that's a line that's going to dominate other teams, can we read much into that if they're just overpowering teams? Because they're can we read much into any of those players because it's going to be a line as a whole is probably going to dominate games or dominate play, but like could you read into one player or two from that?
I think you always can. Just look at one player, especially, and what they're doing, and break down, how they're impacting said line. No matter how stacked the line is, I feel like there's something different that every player can bring there, especially that line. Um, I view Porter Martone as one of those very high IQ, uh, a little bit more physical this year than previously, but he's a big guy. He's got a lot more skill than I think you'd expect. You expect more physicality than skill with a
He's
player
like
that size,
if there's
but
a comp, there's more of like the Kachuk brothers, where he's got the physicality, but he's also got the skill.
yeah, that was the early comparison, um, and I find myself agreeing with it for the most part. I lean toward Jason Robertson, a guy like that, similar size, not quite as physical, a little bit iffy skating, but it's okay because he's very, very intelligent. And even though Robertson's more of a shooter than Martone's got a good shot, but he's more of a passer than I would say. But yeah, that's kind of the game that I get from him. And Misa is, I mean, he dominated the junior level last year much more than Martone did. Um, he put up basically generational numbers. I mean, you don't see players score as much as he did at that young of an age. He's also a very smart player. Uh, I would say he's got a better shot. So yeah, I mean, two very skilled players, and then you have Tej Ginla, who, I mean, he's no nepo baby. He is very capable of being physical and bringing skill as well. So you have a very talented top line. I guess I assumed McKenna would be there, but Iginla just adds a different dimension, kind of maybe a little bit less skill, but definitely just as intimidating as it would have been.
And I think you have a mix of with all that. You have a mix of speed, you have a mix of power and size with Martone there, and you have a mix of not just skill in terms of like they're all scorers, but you have the playmaking ability too, which I think is gonna just make that a good line. You mentioned Ginla, and I'm like, this is really showing our age where it's like we remember. I mean, this T. Ginla, it's like we remember hit Jerome Ginla, and then there's all these players that are like getting old when you notice like, oh wait, I remember watching as a kid their their parents or parents or whatever. Like one of the players that isn't going to be there, but someone that I keep in mind is Caleb Malhotra. It's like Manny Malhotra. Remember him as a grinder, and his son Caleb Malhotra is not a grinder. We'll just leave it at that. One of those players that is that it's a lot of skill, and it could be a great center potentially in the draft, even if he's not at the World Juniors circuit. I feel like I'm kind of wondering what we're talking a lot about Canada. I'm wondering what other countries one to watch out for. And you mentioned Stenberg earlier, but kind of the prospects are the players to really watch on some of the other teams. We talked USA a bit. There's Finland. There's obviously some of the other teams to watch. I mean, we mentioned Juracek earlier. Who are the other prospects out there? And say circle them and really just when they're on the ice to watch out for them.
Well, one of the big ones for me is he's actually a draft eligible prospect for this year. Vigo Bjork from Sweden as well. He's a guy who has kind of, I would say, fallen off the radar a little bit. Not really by any fault of his own. He is playing in the Swedish Hockey League. That's a very, very tough league. I would argue it's better than the AHL just for comparison. And he's putting up the same numbers that William Nylander did at that age. Not super impressive, but when you consider the difficulty of the league, it is. So not a ton of goals, not a ton of assists, but these players who put up those goals and assists become really good players. And Bjork has dominated the junior scene. That's why he's in the SHL right now, because he's been so good against players his age. And this is another one of those opportunities to play against guys your age, especially with Sweden, where a lot of their guys are in the SHL. Finland, a lot of their guys are in Liga, these pro hockey leagues. They finally get to play against players their age. And that's, I think, an interesting dynamic when you're talking about guys who are playing depth minutes for these pro teams, because naturally they're not going to be on the top line like they would be against 19, 18, 20-year-olds, because it's a whole new level, right? So they're getting minutes finally, and Bjork is one specifically where I'm looking out for to be on that first, second line and be with really talented players and potentially have a very good tournament.
He's one of those players on a Sweden team that I think has a lot of those under the radar players that you're like, oh wait, this player's pretty good and this player's pretty good, and he can really stand out there. I feel like I feel like we covered basically everything. It's like dropping the puck. So I almost jokingly should ask you between Luchenko and Martone, which prospect does Rick Tocchet give only 10 minutes of ice time before sending to the AHL next season? But I don't want to go down that route. We could probably talk for hours about that. But I'll ask to wrap up, which is just any lingering thoughts ahead of the tournament. You just kind of want to just drop out there and so like drop the pucks where it's like, all right, this is on my mind. This is something to watch out for. Just some stuff to get off your chest for the World Juniors.
Yeah. Usually your Canada, US, and maybe even Sweden teams are going to kind of get all the headlines, but I would look out for Finland. They did go the distance last year. They did lose to the US, but they're always in it. And even though their team might not look as good as others on paper, they win games. And another team, kind of not necessarily in that vein, because I think their team is super strong again this year, but Czechia, I would look out for them, even though they don't have the flashiest players compared to Canada, for example. They go deep in these tournaments for a reason, and I think they have just as good of a chance as winning as really anybody.
Yeah, I mean that was also something interesting is that last year's final, I actually found out Canada wasn't in it, and I think and that's interesting. Is that actually we'll follow up with this? Is that do you feel like this is it still Canada's? It's Canada's tournament to lose, but do you feel like they can? They're the they're they're the team that's going to win it this year because they haven't won it. I think in 3 years now. I think it was Connor Bedard's year was the last year they won, which doesn't feel like a long time ago, but in Canada's time, that is a long time ago. Do you feel like they're the team that's going to win this tournament in the end?
I mean, honestly, I don't think that there's a team that I would say they are the favorite right now. I just think, again, when you look at Canada, they haven't done anything in a very long time. It's not just that they, haven't won gold in a while. They just haven't done anything. So I just find it hard for me to have them as that number one until they prove otherwise. Because again, these have gotten really competitive recently. Like there are a lot of good teams here, and I don't feel confident putting my money on any one singular team. Although Canada does get the benefit of the doubt. Like if they won gold, if you told me today they win gold, I obviously would not be surprised.
And I mean, you talk about how they play as a team. That's usually the stories. They have the most talented roster, and they run into a team like Finland, which plays well as a unit. And if there is something to read into prospects from Finland, it's that yeah, they play a good collective team game. And you look at a team like the Florida Panthers or the Dallas Stars, who have said, okay, we like these players because they work well with the players around them. That does read into players like overall character prospects and all of that stuff. So it is interesting. It's interesting because I feel like it still can't. It's almost like yeah, it's Canada's tournament to lose, but they haven't won in a while, so they really have to prove that they can win it. All right, that's all we got. It's a little shorter this time. Usually, Justin, when you're on, we do like a few segments here, but it's all we got for the World Junior. So thank you for joining. Anything you're working on, you plug away. I'm sure that you're going to be busy, even though it's the break for the NHL. You're probably going to be busy with a lot of stuff. So let us know what you're working on, where you can find your stuff.
Well, I am working on something. I don't know when I'm going to have it done because it's going to take me a while, but I am doing something for the Hockey Writer Substack. It is a subscription type thing, but I'm looking at all 32 teams, kind of looking at what their long-term future is like in 5 years or so. You know, what players they have on their roster and how good they will be in 5 years. You look at a guy like, I don't know, for example, let's say Nikita Kucherov in Tampa. He'll be 37 years old. I still think he'll be a pretty good player. And you look at all those players that they have on their team in 5 years and how good will they be? And you look at draft picks and prospects, and you just kind of project what this team will be like. I guess an early spoiler, I really like what Anaheim's doing. They have a lot of great young talent, and they have some players who will be at this World Juniors tournament. So they'll be a team to look out for, even though some of their young guys have graduated. Someone like Beckett Seneca is on the NHL team. He has played so well for them this year. Would have been really nice to see him at this tournament, but he's too good at this point. So yeah, they're definitely a team I'm excited about for the future.
Well, that's also him, Matthew Schaefer, which was funny because Matthew Schaefer's on a team that a year ago, if you would have written this article, it would have been like, this team is going nowhere. And then Matthew Schaefer, they win the lottery. It's amazing how much that can change things. But it's also funny, yeah, Beckett Seneca and the Ducks and all the players they have at the World Juniors. I'm old enough to remember when they had like Mason McTavish, Trevor Zegras, and everyone was like, this Ducks team is going to be the best team in the NHL in a few years because look at all those young players, Mason McTavish, Trevor Zegras, and I think fast forward, Mason McTavish didn't work out that one, but he's still a good player. So I don't wanna be too harsh on him, but but yeah, it's gonna be exciting to see when it comes out, especially it's projecting into the future that far ahead in a sport that like hockey turnover happens so quickly and so often, and you just don't know what GMs are going to do, how they're going to react to things, what picks they might trade and stuff like that. So it is fascinating to think about which teams are in the good spots ahead. If I were to guess off the top of my head, I think Montreal would be in a good spot. I don't know off the top of your head which teams, but Montreal, I'm sure, is one of the teams that is going to be in a good spot. And I'm sure San Jose is going to be another one. These are the teams that I'm like, okay, which rebuilds really have the blue chip pieces there. But I feel like I'm spoiling your article, and I don't want to do that too much. So I'll just wrap up now, which is that's all we got. Justin, thank you for joining. It's always a pleasure having you on, and hope everyone enjoys the break. I know there's games. We're recording us on Monday night, so it's Tuesday is the last slate of NHL games. And there's a few days off, but the World Juniors is going on, so definitely tune into some of those games, even if you're taking a break from hockey for a bit. But it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be a fun tournament, and that's all we got. So we hope you enjoyed. Thank you for tuning in. Please like, comment, share, subscribe. You can check out all of Justin's work at the Hockey Writers. You can check out my work at Hockey Hot Stove. And until next time, tune in next time for another great episode. Thank you.